The wipers could not keep up with the snow. Daniel Hart gripped the wheel with both hands, his knuckles pale under the dashboard light, and squinted through the white blur ahead of him. The road had turned into a ghost of itself, the lane markings buried, the world reduced to swirling flakes, and the narrow cone of his headlights. He should not even have been out here. He had promised his daughter he would be home before dark, but the hardware store had run out of the part he needed, and now the storm had swallowed the evening whole. He almost missed it. A shape at the edge of the road, low and dark against the snowbank, half-tipped into a shallow ditch. For a second his mind told him it was nothing, a mailbox, a trash can blown over by the wind. Then he saw the tail light, blinking weakly, and his stomach dropped. He pulled over as fast as he safely could, hazard lights cutting through the storm, and stepped out into air so cold it stung his lungs. The car in the ditch was tilted at an angle, one wheel still spinning slowly, snow already gathering on the hood. He waded through knee-deep drifts and reached the driver's door, his heart hammering. Inside, a woman was slumped against the steering wheel, her dark hair falling across her face, a thin trickle of blood at her temple. For one terrible moment he thought she was gone. Then her chest rose, just barely, and relief crashed through him so hard his legs nearly buckled. Hey, can you hear me?" He pulled at the door, and it groaned open, stiff with cold. "I need you to open your eyes for me." Her eyelids fluttered. A soft groan escaped her lips. "Cold," she whispered. "So cold." I know. I've got you." Daniel unbuckled her seatbelt with shaking fingers and eased her out of the car, wrapping his coat around her shoulders even as the wind tried to rip it away. She was lighter than he expected, and completely limp against him, her head lolling toward his shoulder. He half-carried, half-dragged her through the snow to his truck, laid her across the back seat, and cranked the heater to its highest setting. His hands were shaking as he called for help, his voice cracking as he gave directions to a road that barely had a name anymore, buried as it was under the storm. The dispatcher told him an ambulance would take too long in this weather, that his best chance was to get her to the hospital himself, if he could do it safely. So he drove, slower than he had ever driven in his life, glancing every few seconds at the mirror, watching her chest rise and fall, silently begging her to keep breathing. By the time he reached the hospital, his shirt was soaked through with sweat despite the cold, and his mind was empty of everything except the woman in his back seat. Nurses rushed out with a gurney. Doors swung open. He stood in the hallway afterward, snow still melting off his boots, and realized he did not even know her name. He waited 3 hours in a chair too small for his frame, drinking bad coffee from a vending machine, texting his sister to check on Lily, who was staying the night at her house. He told himself he would leave once he knew the woman was stable. He told himself this was not his responsibility, but something kept him rooted to that chair, some thread of concern he could not explain, pulling tighter with every minute that passed. A doctor finally came to find him. Mild concussion, some bruising, dangerously low body temperature when she arrived, but she would recover. She was asking for the man who found her. Daniel walked into the small hospital room feeling strangely nervous, as if he were about to meet someone important rather than a stranger he had pulled from a ditch an hour ago. She was sitting up now, a blanket around her shoulders, a bandage taped neatly above her eyebrow. Up close, even pale and shaken, she was striking, dark eyes that seemed to hold something soft and sad at the same time, a small, grateful smile forming as soon as she saw him. "You're the one who found me," she said, her voice still rough. "Daniel," he said, suddenly unsure what to do with his hands. "Daniel Hart." "Elena," she said. "Elena Marsh." She studied him for a moment, and something in her expression softened further, as if she were memorizing his face. "I don't know how to thank you. I don't remember much. One second I was driving, and the next, everything went white, and then you were there. The roads are terrible tonight. It could have happened to anyone. But it happened to me, and you stopped." She looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "Most people would have driven past. It's easy to look away from something that isn't your problem. I couldn't just leave you there. I know. That's exactly why I'm grateful." She glanced toward the window, where snow was still falling steadily under the parking lot lights. "I don't have anyone to call, if I'm honest. My parents passed years ago, And I moved here for work not long ago. I haven't made many friends yet. A small, embarrassed laugh. Listen to me. Telling my whole life story to the man who just saved it. It's all right, Daniel said, and meant it. There was something in the way she said it, matter of fact but tinged with loneliness, that struck a chord in him. He knew what it was to feel alone in a place that was supposed to be home. He had felt it every day since his wife passed, raising Lily by himself, learning how to braid hair from online videos, and cook dinners that were not simply cereal and toast. He stayed another 20 minutes, though he told himself each time that this would be the last. When he finally said goodbye, promising to check on her release the next morning, she caught his hand for just a moment. "Thank you, Daniel Hart," she said. "I mean that more than you know." He drove home through streets slowly being plowed, snowbanks rising on either side like white walls, and could not stop thinking about the way she had said his name, as though it already meant something to her. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world outside gleaming and silent under a thick blanket of snow. Daniel picked Lily up from his sister's house, and the 8-year-old chattered the whole ride home about hot chocolate and snow forts, completely unaware of the woman occupying her father's thoughts. "You seem far away today," his sister Nora said as she handed him a thermos of coffee for the road. She had always been able to read him too easily. "Just tired," Daniel said. "Long night. Anything you want to tell me?" "Not yet," he said, and something about the way he smiled told her there might be, eventually. He returned to the hospital that afternoon, under the excuse of checking on a stranger's welfare, though by then he suspected it was no longer entirely about kindness. Elena was dressed now, sitting by the window, looking out at the bright, snow-covered world with an expression that seemed almost hungry for it, as though she had been trapped somewhere gray for a long time and was only now remembering what light looked like. "You came back," she said, and her smile was real, unguarded, warm enough to chase away the last of the winter chill still clinging to his coat. "I said I would. Not everyone keeps that kind of promise. I do." She studied him again, that same careful, searching look, and something passed behind her eyes, quick as a shadow, gone before he could name it. Then she smiled again, brighter this time, and asked if he would help her find a way home, since her car was likely beyond saving and she had no one else to call. He said yes without hesitation, and did not notice, in that moment, how easily she had already made herself impossible to refuse. Over the following days, Daniel found reasons to check on her. A ride to collect her things from the wrecked car, a visit to make sure the small apartment she rented, sparsely furnished and strangely bare of photographs or personal keepsakes, had heat and food in the refrigerator. Each visit stretched a little longer than the last. Each conversation left him thinking about her long after he had gone home. She was easy to talk to, quick with a laugh, generous with her attention in a way that made him feel like the only person in the room. She asked about Lily with real interest, remembering small details he mentioned only once, her favorite cartoon, the name of her stuffed rabbit, the fact that she liked her pancakes cut into triangles instead of squares. It was a small thing, but it mattered to him more than he expected, this stranger caring enough to remember. Within 2 weeks, what began as a rescue had quietly become something else entirely. Daniel found himself smiling at his phone during meetings, replaying conversations in his head while he waited for Lily at school pickup, wondering, with a flutter of nervous hope he had not felt in years, whether it would be too soon to ask her to dinner. He told himself it was fate that had put her car in that ditch on the one night he happened to be driving that road. He told himself the universe had a strange, generous sense of timing. He did not consider, not even once, that some rescues are not accidents at all, and that some strangers, stranded in the snow, are exactly where they mean to be. Spring arrived slowly that year, melting the snow in patches, until the world turned to mud, and then, finally, to green. By the time the first warm afternoon came, Daniel and Elena had been seeing each other for 3 months, and Lily had started calling her by her first name without being asked to, which Daniel took as a quiet kind of blessing. Elena had a way of making herself essential. She showed up with small gifts that seemed to know exactly what was needed. A book Lily had mentioned wanting once in passing, a specific brand of coffee Daniel preferred but rarely bought for himself because it felt like an indulgence. She learned the rhythms of his house quickly, which cupboard held the mugs, which nights Lily had soccer practice, which days Daniel came home too tired to cook. Within weeks, she was not a guest in his life. She was woven into it. "She's wonderful with Lily," Nora admitted one evening, watching from the kitchen window as Elena pushed Lily on the tire swing in the backyard, both of them laughing at something only they understood. "I'll give her that." "But," Daniel said, because he could hear the word waiting in his sister's voice. "But I don't know anything about her. Where's her family? Her old friends? Every time I ask about her life before she moved here, she changes the subject so smoothly you'd almost miss it. She told me her parents passed years ago. She said moving here was a fresh start after a bad relationship. Did she tell you where she moved from?" Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again, realizing he did not have a clear answer. "Somewhere south. She doesn't like talking about it. I don't push. Everyone has things they'd rather leave behind." Nora said nothing more that evening, but the question lodged itself in Daniel's mind like a splinter he could not quite reach. He brought it up with Elena that weekend, gently, over dinner after Lily had gone to bed. She was quiet for a long moment, turning her wine glass slowly between her fingers, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried a practiced kind of sadness that made him regret asking at all. "I don't like talking about where I came from because it wasn't good, Daniel. There was someone before you, someone who made me feel small every single day, until I stopped believing I deserved anything better." Her eyes glistened, catching the candlelight. "When I left everything. Friends, family, all of it, because they never understood why I stayed as long as I did, and I got tired of explaining myself. Starting over meant starting over completely." Daniel reached across the table and took her hand, guilt washing through him for pushing at wounds he had not known existed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring up something painful. You didn't do anything wrong, I just haven't found the right time to tell you everything yet." She squeezed his hand, offering a small, brave smile. "Give me time. I promise I'll tell you all of it eventually." It was, Daniel thought later, a perfectly reasonable answer. It explained everything, and asked for nothing except patience, a currency he was more than willing to spend on someone who made his daughter laugh the way she did, who made his empty house feel full again. By summer, Elena had moved in. It happened gradually enough that Daniel could not point to a single day when it became official, a few clothes in the closet becoming a full wardrobe, a toothbrush becoming a shelf of her own products in the bathroom, until one morning he realized her presence in his home was simply a fact of his life, as permanent as the walls themselves. Financially, she insisted she wanted to contribute, though her explanations for why she could not always do so grew increasingly elaborate. She worked, she said, doing freelance consulting for companies whose names Daniel never quite retained, work that paid well but irregularly, in large sums that arrived every few months rather than steady paychecks. In the meantime, she said, she hated feeling like a burden, and Daniel, wanting to ease her embarrassment, told her not to worry about it, that they were a family now, and families did not keep score. It was Lily who first noticed something was wrong, though she lacked the words to explain it clearly. Daniel gently asked Elena about it, and she looked genuinely wounded by the suggestion, her eyes filling with tears so quickly it startled him. "I would never do anything to hurt her, Daniel. I love that little girl. Maybe she's just adjusting. Children can be sensitive to change, even good change." He believed her, mostly because he wanted to, and because the alternative, that something was quietly wrong beneath the surface of his new happiness, was too large a thought to hold comfortably. The first missing sum of money appeared in September, a withdrawal from their shared household account that Daniel did not remember authorizing. When he mentioned it to Elena, confused rather than accusing, she explained it away instantly, an emergency payment for her aunt's medical bills, a woman Daniel had never met and knew little about beyond her existence in Elena's careful stories. She apologized profusely for not asking first, promised to pay it back the moment her next contract cleared, and cried softly enough that Daniel found himself comforting her rather than questioning the withdrawal further. A second withdrawal followed in October, larger this time, attributed to a debt from her past relationship that had resurfaced unexpectedly, a threat from her former partner that she refused to discuss in detail no matter how gently Daniel pressed. She grew distant and fragile whenever the topic arose, retreating into a silence so convincingly wounded that Daniel eventually stopped asking, afraid of causing her further pain. By November, Daniel had opened a joint credit line with Elena, at her suggestion, framed as a practical step for a couple building a shared future together. She explained that her irregular freelance income made traditional loans difficult to secure alone, and that combining their credit would help her establish stability while she worked toward steadier work. Daniel, in love and eager to prove his commitment, signed without reading every line as carefully as he should have. His sister Nora grew more concerned with each passing month, though her warnings landed on ears increasingly unwilling to hear them. She began quietly asking around, mentioning Elena's name to friends who worked in fields where such things might be noticed. Background checks, financial records, anything that might either confirm her fears or finally put them to rest. It was a co-worker of Nora's, a woman who processed loan applications at a regional bank, who first flagged something strange. Names attached to certain financial documents did not match the woman Nora described meeting at her brother's house. The photograph on one expired identification card showed the same face, the same dark eyes and careful smile, but under an entirely different name. Nora sat on this information for 2 full weeks, uncertain how to raise something so serious without sounding as though she were simply jealous of her brother's happiness, or worse, without being wrong and destroying a relationship that seemed, on the surface at least, to be making him happy for the first time in years. She finally brought it to him on a quiet Sunday afternoon, while Elena was out running errands and Lily was upstairs occupied with a puzzle. Nora placed a printed page on the kitchen table between them, the grainy photocopy of an identification card bearing Elena's unmistakable face beneath a name Daniel had never heard before. "I need you to look at this before you say anything," Nora said, her voice careful, rehearsed, the tone of someone who had practiced this conversation many times in the mirror and still felt unprepared for it. "I'm not trying to hurt you. I would never do that. But I can't sit by and watch this happen without saying something." Daniel stared at the photograph for a long moment, his mind refusing at first to connect the face he loved with the stranger's name printed beside it. This has to be a mistake. People look alike. This could be anyone. "Look at her eyes, Daniel. Look at the shape of her mouth. You know that face better than I do." He did know that face. He had traced its lines with his thumb while she slept beside him. He had watched it laugh at his jokes and soften when Lily hugged her goodnight. And yet here it was, attached to a name that meant nothing to him, evidence of a life he had never been told existed. "Where did you even get this?" "It doesn't matter where I got it. What matters is that it's real, and that it means she's been lying to you since the day you pulled her out of that ditch." Nora reached across the table and took his hand, the same gesture he had used with Elena so many times before, though this one carried the weight of warning rather than comfort. "I know you love her. I know Lily loves her too. But love doesn't change what's true, Daniel. Please, just look into it before you give her anything else. Before you lose anything else." Daniel sat in silence for a long time after Nora left, the photocopied page still on the table in front of him, Elena's familiar face staring up at him, beneath an unfamiliar name. Outside, the afternoon light was fading into evening, and somewhere upstairs he could hear Lily humming softly to herself, unaware that the ground beneath their small family had just begun, quietly and irreversibly, to shift. When he heard the front door open 20 minutes later, Elena's cheerful voice calling out that she had brought home ingredients for dinner, Daniel folded the page carefully and slid it into his pocket, not yet ready to voice the question forming, cold and heavy, at the center of his chest. Who exactly had he let into his home, into his daughter's life, into his heart, and how much more was she planning to take before he found the courage to ask? Dinner that night was ordinary in every way that mattered, and Daniel hated how easily he managed to smile through it. Elena talked about a new client project, laughed at something Lily said about her teacher, reached over at one point to wipe a smear of sauce from Lily's chin, with the casual tenderness of someone who had never once considered leaving. Watching her, Daniel felt the photocopy in his pocket like a stone, heavy and cold, impossible to ignore, and yet impossible, for now, to mention. He told himself he needed proof before he said anything. Real proof, not a photocopy his sister could have gotten from anywhere, not a resemblance that could be explained away by bad lighting or an old picture of a stranger. He needed to know for certain before he risked the life he had built, the life Lily had grown to depend on, the life he had allowed himself, for the first time since his wife's death, to actually enjoy. So he began to watch. Quietly, carefully, the way a man watches a house he suspects might be on fire somewhere deep inside its walls, unwilling to believe it until he sees the smoke with his own eyes. He noticed things he had somehow overlooked before, or perhaps had simply chosen not to see. Elena kept her phone locked with a code she never entered in front of him, angling the screen away out of habit rather than any single suspicious moment. She took calls in the garage sometimes, the door shut firmly behind her, her voice dropping into a register he did not recognize, clipped and businesslike, nothing like the warm, easy tone she used with him and Lily. One evening in early December, while Elena was out for what she called a work dinner with a client, Daniel found himself standing outside the small storage unit she rented on the edge of town, a place she visited occasionally to collect what she called old belongings from her life before him. She had never invited him along and he had never asked to come, respecting what he assumed was simply privacy around a painful past. He did not go inside. He told himself it was because he did not have a key, though the truth was closer to fear, an unwillingness to learn something that could not be unlearned. Instead, he sat in his truck across the street, engine off, watching the rows of orange doors under the sodium lights, and tried to remember exactly how many times she had mentioned this place, how carefully she always changed the subject afterward. He called an old friend from college the next day, a man named Peter Voss, who now worked in a small investigations firm downtown, the kind of business that handled background checks for companies wary of hiring the wrong person. Daniel felt almost sick asking, as though the act of hiring someone to look into Elena's past was itself a betrayal, but Nora's photocopy sat folded in his desk drawer, refusing to be forgotten. "I need you to look into someone," Daniel said over coffee, sliding a slip of paper across the table with Elena's name written on it, along with the unfamiliar name from the identification card. "I think she might be using more than one name." Peter studied the paper for a moment, his expression carefully neutral in the way of a man used to delivering difficult news. "Give me a week. Sometimes these things are nothing. A woman changes her name after a bad marriage, wants a clean start. Nothing sinister about that. And sometimes it's something else entirely." Peter folded the paper and tucked it into his jacket. "I'll call you when I know." The week that followed was the longest of Daniel's life, longer even than the nights after his wife's death, when grief had at least been simple in its devastation, uncomplicated by hope or doubt. Every evening he came home to Elena's warm smile, her questions about his day, her hand finding his across the dinner table, and every evening he smiled back and said nothing, carrying his secret the way she seemed to carry hers. Lily's unease around Elena had not improved. If anything, it had deepened, though the girl still could not articulate exactly why. One night, tucking her into bed, Daniel asked gently if something specific had happened, if Elena had ever said or done anything that scared her. Lily was quiet for a long moment, picking at the edge of her blanket. "She looks at your desk sometimes," she finally said, "the one in your office. When she thinks nobody's watching, she looks through the drawers." Daniel's chest tightened. "What drawers, sweetheart?" "The one with the papers. The bank ones." Lily looked up at him, her small face creased with worry that no child her age should carry. "Are you mad at me for telling?" "No," Daniel said, kissing her forehead, forcing his voice to stay steady. "You did exactly the right thing." He did not sleep that night. He lay beside Elena, listening to her breathe, wondering how many nights she had lain there beside him, while quietly building a case against his trust, patient in a way that now, in hindsight, felt less like love and more like careful, deliberate work. Peter called 6 days later, his voice grave in a way that told Daniel everything before a single word was spoken. "I need you to sit down for this," Peter said. Daniel was already sitting, in his truck, parked outside his own house because he could not bring himself to have this conversation under the same roof as her. "Just tell me. The woman you know as Elena Marsh has used at least 4 different names across 3 states in the past 6 years. Each time, the pattern is nearly identical. She finds a man who is vulnerable in some specific way, recently widowed, recently divorced, sometimes recovering from an illness or a financial setback, someone whose guard is already partly down. She becomes essential to his life quickly, often within a matter of weeks. Joint accounts follow. Credit lines follow. Then, once the resources run dry or suspicion starts to build, she disappears, sometimes overnight, always without a trace that leads anywhere useful. Daniel's hands had gone numb around the steering wheel. How many men? At least 3 that I could confirm with any certainty, possibly more that never reported it, out of embarrassment, or because the losses weren't severe enough to justify the trouble, or because by the time they realized what happened, there was nothing left to recover. Peter paused. Daniel, one of these men lost his house. Another lost a business he'd spent 15 years building. This isn't a woman running from a bad relationship. This is a pattern, executed with a great deal of care. The car accident, Daniel said slowly, the thought arriving with a sickening clarity he could not push away. The snowstorm. Was that even real? I can't say for certain, and I want to be careful not to overstate what I know. The accident itself appears to be genuine, based on the wreck record I found, but I'd be lying if I told you it isn't exactly the kind of situation someone like her has used before. A moment of vulnerability that creates an instant, powerful bond with whoever happens to help. Peter's voice softened slightly. I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. Daniel sat in the darkened truck for a long time after the call ended, watching the lit windows of his own house, where Elena's shadow moved across the curtains, setting the table for dinner, humming something cheerful enough to carry faintly through the glass. Every warm memory of the past 9 months rearranged itself in his mind. No longer a love story, but a carefully constructed performance. Every gesture, every tearful confession about a painful past, every soft admission of loneliness, now suspect, now potentially nothing more than a tool, used to keep him exactly where she needed him to be. He thought of Lily upstairs, of the drawers she had seen Elena searching through, of the joint credit line he had signed without reading closely enough, of every withdrawal explained away by tragedies that might never have existed at all. He thought of his late wife, and the promise he had made at her graveside to keep their daughter safe. A promise he had nearly let slip through his fingers because a stranger had known exactly which words a lonely, grieving man most wanted to hear. When he finally walked back into his house that evening, Elena greeted him with a kiss and a question about his day, and Daniel found, to his own quiet surprise, that he was able to answer normally, to eat dinner across from her without his hands shaking, to laugh at Lily's stories about school, as though nothing in his world had changed at all. It was, he realized with a strange, cold clarity, the first genuinely calculated thing he had ever done in his life, and he intended to see it through completely, before showing her even a hint of what he now knew. He would need more than Peter's findings before he acted. He would need proof solid enough to protect not just his money but his daughter, and enough patience to gather it without tipping his hand to a woman who, he now understood, was far better at this game than he could ever have imagined. The next 2 weeks became the strangest performance of Daniel's life. A quiet, careful theater played out across breakfast tables and bedtime stories, while underneath it all he worked methodically to gather what he needed. He met Peter twice more, in a coffee shop far from his neighborhood, going over documents, timelines, and the names of the men who had come before him, each one a warning he wished he had received 9 months earlier. One name kept surfacing in Peter's research, a man named Gareth Doyle, who had lost nearly everything 2 years earlier in another state, in circumstances that matched Daniel's own with an unsettling precision. Daniel found his number through Peter's contacts and called him one evening while Elena was out, sitting in his truck in the driveway because he could no longer trust the walls of his own house to keep a secret. Gareth's voice, when he answered, carried the particular exhaustion of a man who had explained his own humiliation too many times to too many people. "She find you too, huh?" he said, once Daniel explained who he was and why he was calling. It was not a question. "I don't know everything yet. I'm trying to understand what I'm dealing with." "You're dealing with someone who studies people the way a hunter studies a trail. She knew things about me I never told her. Things I only figured out later she must have learned by watching, by asking around, by going through things when I wasn't home." Gareth was quiet for a moment. "I lost my house. Took me 2 years to climb back out of the hole she left me in. And the worst part isn't even the money. It's realizing that everything you thought was love was just somebody doing a job. How did it end for you? How did she leave?" "Overnight. No warning, no fight, nothing dramatic. I came home from work one day and she was simply gone, along with everything of value that wasn't bolted to the floor. Took me 3 weeks to even report it, because I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation, that she would call, that something must have happened to her. Gareth's laugh was short and humorless. Nothing happened to her. She just finished what she came to do. The call left Daniel sitting in the cold driveway for a long time afterward, staring at the warm, lit windows of his house, where Elena's shape moved past the kitchen curtains, setting the table exactly the way she had every night for months. He thought about Lily's small, worried face, about the drawers Elena had searched, about the joint credit line that could still, even now, be used to inflict damage he had not yet imagined. He decided he needed a plan that would protect both the evidence and his daughter before he confronted her directly. Working with Peter, and eventually with a detective named Marissa Wren who specialized in financial exploitation cases, Daniel began quietly closing the doors Elena had spent months prying open. He moved Lily's college savings and his own retirement accounts into instruments Elena could not access without his direct authorization. He changed the passwords on accounts she did not yet know existed, ones from before their relationship that he had never bothered to update. He photographed every document in his desk drawer exactly as it had been left, in case anything went missing before he was ready to act. Detective Wren was careful and measured in her advice. "The moment she senses you know, she'll run," she told him during their second meeting, in a small office that smelled of stale coffee and old case files. "Women like this build an exit plan the same way they build the relationship, carefully, in advance. If we move too soon, without enough evidence, she disappears and starts over somewhere else with someone else's savings. If we wait too long, she may drain whatever's left before we can stop her. So what do I do? You keep acting normal a little while longer. You let us build the case properly. And when we're ready, you'll help us catch her with everything still in place." Detective Wren's expression softened slightly, the first crack of genuine sympathy Daniel had seen from her. "I know how hard that is. Believe me, I've seen it before. But it's the only way to make sure she can't simply do this to someone else the moment she leaves your house." 2 more weeks passed in this strange, suspended state, Daniel playing the part of a devoted, unsuspecting partner, while quietly feeding information to Detective Wren whenever Elena left the house on one of her mysterious errands. He learned to hide his phone calls the way she once had, learned to lie smoothly about where he had been, learned, in the cruelest possible way, to become fluent in exactly the kind of deception he had never imagined himself capable of. The break came from an unexpected direction. Detective Wren's team had been quietly monitoring financial activity connected to Elena's known aliases, and one evening in late January, a large transfer attempt triggered an alert, an effort to move a significant sum from the joint credit line directly into an account under yet another name, one Daniel had never heard before. The timing suggested she was preparing to leave soon, likely within days, and Detective Wren called Daniel immediately, her voice sharp with urgency. "It's time," she said. "We need to move tonight, before she has the chance to disappear." Daniel's hands shook as he drove home that evening, rehearsing in his mind exactly how the next few hours needed to unfold. Lily was staying at Nora's house, a arrangement he had made 2 days earlier under the excuse of a school project, grateful now more than ever that his daughter would not be present for whatever happened next. Elena was in the kitchen when he arrived, humming to herself as she stirred something on the stove, utterly unaware that a car with 2 detectives inside was already parking quietly down the street, waiting for Daniel's signal. "You're home early," she said, smiling over her shoulder, and for one final disorienting moment, Daniel felt the old warmth try to rise in his chest, some stubborn, foolish part of him still hoping there might be an explanation, still hoping the woman he had fallen for might somehow be separate from the pattern Peter and Detective Wren had uncovered. "We need to talk," he said instead, and something in his voice must have carried more weight than he intended, because Elena's spoon stilled in the pot, her shoulders tensing almost imperceptibly before she turned to face him with her usual easy smile. "Of course. Is everything all right?" "I know about Gareth Doyle," Daniel said quietly. "I know about the others. I know your real name isn't Elena Marsh." For a moment, nothing happened at all. Then something shifted behind her eyes, the warmth draining away so completely and so quickly that Daniel felt, for the first time, as though he were looking at a stranger who had been standing in his kitchen the entire time, wearing a face he had mistaken for someone he loved. "I don't know what you think you know," she said, her voice carefully even, "but I think you're confused." "I'm not confused. I have documents. I have a detective sitting outside right now." Daniel kept his voice steady, though his heart was pounding hard enough that he could feel it in his throat. "It's over, Diane." The name landed like a slap. Her composure cracked at last, something raw and calculating flashing across her face before she smoothed it back into place, too late to undo what had already been revealed. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," she said quietly. "I never meant for it to go this far with you specifically. You were kind. Lily was sweet. For a while I even let myself pretend this one might be different." "Pretend," Daniel repeated, the word landing somewhere deep and cold inside him. "That's all any of this ever was to you." "It's complicated," she said, and for a moment something almost like genuine regret flickered across her expression, gone as quickly as it had appeared. "You'll never understand what it's like to need to survive the way I've had to survive. You could have just told me the truth. I would have helped you, if it were real. Nobody helps for free, Daniel. Not really. Everyone wants something in return eventually, and I learned a long time ago it was safer to take what I needed before someone decided to take it from me first." Outside, headlights swept briefly across the kitchen window as Detective Wren's car pulled into the driveway, and Elena's eyes flicked toward the sound, her whole body tensing as though calculating, even now, whether there was still some way out of the room that did not end in consequences. There was not. Detective Wren and her partner came through the front door moments later, calm and professional, laying out exactly what had been found: the aliases, the joint credit line drained by nearly a third before the transfer had been flagged and stopped, the pattern stretching back across 3 states, and at least 4 other names. Elena, or Diane, or whatever name truly belonged to her beneath all the others, said very little as it was explained, her expression settling into something flat and unreadable. The warmth she had worn so convincingly for 9 months, finally, completely gone. As she was led out of the house that had briefly been hers, she paused once in the doorway and looked back at Daniel. And for a fraction of a second, something almost human passed across her face, something that might have been shame, or might simply have been calculation for whatever came next. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "Lily really is a wonderful kid." Daniel said nothing. He stood in his own kitchen long after the door had closed behind her, the stove still warm, dinner still cooking untouched in the pot, and felt something complicated settle over him. Not quite relief, not quite grief, but the strange, hollow quiet of a house finally, completely emptied of a lie. The house felt strange in the days that followed, too quiet in some rooms and too loud in others, every space holding some small reminder of the 9 months Elena had spent living inside it. Daniel found her handwriting on a grocery list, still stuck to the refrigerator, and stood staring at it for a long time before finally throwing it away. He found one of her sweaters still hanging in the closet and folded it carefully into a box rather than tossing it directly into the trash, some old habit of decency refusing to abandon him even now. Lily came home from Nora's house 2 days later, and Daniel sat her down at the kitchen table to explain, as gently and honestly as he could manage, that Elena would not be coming back, that she had not been entirely truthful about who she was, and that none of what had happened was in any way Lily's fault. His daughter listened with the serious, careful attention children reserve for moments they sense are important, even before they fully understand why. "Is that why she looked through your desk?" she asked finally. "Was she looking for something to steal?" "Yes, sweetheart, I think she was. I knew something was wrong," Lily said quietly, picking at the edge of the table. "I just didn't know how to say it right." "You said it exactly right," Daniel told her, pulling her into a hug. "You told me the truth, and that helped me figure out the rest. You did something very brave. The financial damage, once fully tallied, was significant, but not catastrophic, thanks largely to the swift work Daniel had done with Detective Wren in the final weeks before the confrontation. The credit line had been drained by a meaningful sum, and 2 smaller accounts Elena had access to had been emptied entirely, but the larger reserves Daniel had quietly moved beyond her reach remained intact, a small mercy that made the following months of recovery far less brutal than they might otherwise have been. Detective Wren's investigation, combined with Peter's earlier research, eventually connected Diane, whose full legal name turned out to be Diane Voss, to a pattern stretching across 4 states and at least 6 identifiable victims, though investigators suspected the true number was considerably higher, given how many men in similar situations were often too embarrassed to come forward. She was arrested within the month, the transfer alert having given Detective Wren's team enough evidence to track her before she managed to disappear entirely, as she had so many times before. The legal process that followed was slow and, at times, exhausting in ways Daniel had not anticipated, filled with paperwork, statements, and long stretches of waiting for a system that moved at its own patient pace, regardless of how urgently he wanted the entire chapter closed. He testified once, in a small, unremarkable courtroom, describing the snowstorm, the rescue, the months that followed, watching Diane's face the entire time for some flicker of the woman he had once believed he loved, and finding, mostly, only the same flat stillness she had worn the night she was led out of his kitchen. Gareth Doyle attended one of the hearings as well, and the 2 men spoke briefly afterward in the courthouse hallway, an odd, unspoken kinship settling between them. 2 strangers, connected by the same careful, patient deception. "Does it get easier?" Daniel asked him quietly. "Some parts do," Gareth said. "The anger fades faster than you'd expect. What takes longer is trusting your own judgment again. For a while, you second-guess every good feeling, wondering if it's real or if you're just being fooled again." He offered a small, tired smile. "But it does get better. You start noticing the good instincts you still have, the ones that were right about her from the beginning, the little warnings you ignored because you wanted so badly to believe. Eventually you learn to listen to those instincts again instead of talking yourself out of them." Nora, for her part, never once said the words she might have been entitled to say, the simple human satisfaction of having been right when it mattered most. Instead, she showed up quietly in the months that followed, helping with Lily after school, sitting with Daniel over coffee while he sorted through financial paperwork, offering steady, uncomplicated support, without ever making him feel foolish for how long it had taken him to see clearly. "I'm not angry that you didn't believe me right away," she told him one evening, when he finally worked up the courage to apologize for dismissing her early warnings. "Love makes people slow to see things they don't want to see. That's not a character flaw, Daniel. That's just what love does sometimes. What matters is that you did see it, eventually, and you protected yourself and Lily, the moment you understood what was happening." Spring returned again, as it always does, the snow melting once more into mud and then into green, and Daniel found himself, almost without noticing the transition, simply living again, rather than merely recovering. He took Lily on a camping trip in early June, just the 2 of them, sleeping under a sky full of stars far from any streetlight, and realized somewhere around the 2nd night that he had gone nearly a full week without thinking about Diane Voss even once. He did not close himself off entirely, though he moved differently now, more carefully, less willing to mistake urgency for connection or vulnerability for automatic trust. When a woman named Grace, a teacher at Lily's school, began striking up easy, unhurried conversations with him at pickup and drop-off over the following year, he let the friendship develop slowly, on its own patient timeline, without the dizzying speed that had once felt, mistakenly, like proof of something real. He thought sometimes about the snowstorm that had started everything, about the moment he had seen the tail light blinking weakly against the dark, about how close he had come to simply driving past, telling himself the roads were too dangerous, the risk too great, someone else's problem to solve. He did not regret stopping. He would never regret stopping, no matter what had followed, because the man who drove past a stranger in trouble to protect himself from possible complications was not a man he ever wanted to become, whatever the cost of that kindness had eventually turned out to be. What he had learned, slowly and at real cost, was not that kindness itself was dangerous, but that kindness needed to be paired with patience, with boundaries, with the willingness to ask hard questions even when the answers might unravel something that felt, in the moment, like exactly the happiness he had been searching for. Real love, he came to understand, did not need to move quickly. It did not require an immediate joint account, an immediate merging of 2 entire lives before either person had proven, through time and consistency, that they deserved that level of trust. Lily grew steadier as the months passed too, her wariness fading into something more like quiet confidence. The small, worried furrow that had once appeared on her forehead whenever Elena entered a room replaced, gradually, by the easy, unguarded laughter of a child who no longer sensed danger hiding beneath the surface of her own home. One evening, nearly a year after the snowstorm, Daniel sat on the back porch watching Lily chase fireflies across the darkening yard, her laughter rising bright and clear into the summer air, and felt something settle inside him that had been missing since long before Diane Voss had ever crashed her car into that ditch. A sense that his life, however imperfect and however hard-won, finally belonged entirely to him and his daughter again, free of anyone else's careful, patient design. He still believed, even after everything, that stopping for a stranger on a dangerous night was the right thing to do, and would always be the right thing to do, regardless of what that stranger turned out to hide beneath her grateful smile. The mistake, he had come to understand, was never in the stopping. It was in handing over, piece by piece, the parts of his life that deserved to be earned slowly, proven over time, rather than given away simply because someone knew exactly the right words to make loneliness feel, however briefly, like it had finally found its cure. Detective Wren called him one final time that autumn, informing him that Diane Voss had accepted a plea agreement, sparing the other victims the ordeal of additional trials, and would serve a significant sentence for the pattern of exploitation uncovered across 4 states. It was, Wren said, as close to justice as these cases usually manage to reach. Imperfect and delayed but real nonetheless. Daniel thanked her, hung up the phone, and walked out to the backyard where Lily was practicing cartwheels on the grass, her laughter echoing across the yard as she stumbled and fell, and immediately tried again, undeterred, endlessly resilient in the particular way that only children seem to manage. He watched her for a long moment, this small, fierce person who had somehow, through it all, kept her own instincts sharper than his had been, and felt something close to peace settle over the both of them at last, hard-won, and quietly, permanently, their own.